What background, experience, and training you had that would help your role on the board?
Okay, so my current job requires interacting with a lot of different types of people. I work with sellers, I work with buyers, mostly in the restaurant industry. So I'm very used to problem solving. We're out of one thing or we have to find something, products, etc. I'm good at finding ways of making things work, even if it's not exactly what people want. And I think that finding middle ground is something that sort of comes with the territory in dealing with lots of different people, large groups of people, etc. I also am sort of organized in a creative way. I run a party room at Convergence, another local convention, and I basically do all of our budgeting and our ordering and our inventory myself. And that's for a 3-day event. And so that's also something that I've had a lot of experience in. What else? I sort of enjoy things like OSHA manuals and 600-page legalese. It's really enjoyable, which is, I guess, not super common, but I kind of like doing it, I guess. I like taking in information and finding ways to best explain it to other people. I learn differently, and so obviously, like during regular school, it was kind of a problem, but it's definitely something that has allowed me to help teach people in different ways and understand that people learn differently, and sometimes even rephrasing is a better option than continuing to repeat yourself, because it never worked for me, so I don't know why it would work for other people.
What is your understanding of your fiduciary responsibilities to MNFurs?
That's that word that we had to all look up. That's great. I think that being in a leadership position or in a group or a committee or any sort of kind of thing like that is something where you're taking the responsibility of helping other people, and not only in like bettering, but also just maintaining, and then also problem solving. And I think that is the responsibility of a board, is to be able to listen to the people around you, not just on the board, but in the community, even if it's someone who says something that they've never been part of it before, or if it's something that kind of is an issue or feels like maybe other people may think that way but haven't said anything. I think that it's an important thing to take that responsibility and kind of be like, yes, I will approach this as a singular person and then also as the board, to try and find the best course of action.
Yeah, that works.
Yeah, just in case, I'll move this. Cool.
What do you consider our role and relationship with local, regional, and national groups like Anime Twin Cities, GPS, Midwest Fur Fest, and more?
I would hope that we have a good standing relationship. I know that obviously, because it's a lot of volunteers, it's a lot of people, things can get kind of hazy. Obviously, I know from personal experience and personal understanding, with a couple different groups and a couple different boards and a couple different con groupings as a whole of people who are in sort of management or group management, I think that it's difficult to maintain perfect relationships with everybody. I would hope to help keep everything sort of stable. I've been in a lot of those communities, sort of off and on, very low-key, and I think that it's important to try and maintain that and open communication as best as possible. I think if there's a couple sticking points, that can really break that apart, and it can also do that in the future, which is really too bad. And so, like, if there are issues that have arisen for, any number of things, I think that trying to find that middle ground is really important for any of those. Even if it means compromising, I think that that's better than sort of holding on to any past issues, especially when it comes to things that are constantly changing. I mean, every single one of those groups and more. They all have different people coming in and out, and they all have different views, and I think that it's important to always take that into account and try to work things out as best we can.
How would you expand the role of MNFurs and the community based on the foundation of education and community service?
I'm big on community service. I think that representation as a group, as especially one that is welcoming, I think that that's oftentimes a hang-up that people have with any fandom. But I think that it's important to sort of look towards that and be like, yes, we will approach things in an open way, even if that means that it's not at the same specific events, even if we broaden out, even if we try and sort of just have information available to other folks, whether it be people who are trying to enter into the group or who just want to know. I think that the big one for me is like young people. I know that we had an increase of younger people last year at FM, and I think that every single time I've encountered some young people, either like on the internet or in person, it's always very overwhelming, and I can totally understand that. Like getting into something that like maybe your friends really are like, what's wrong? What? No, don't do that. But like, I think that it's important to support those people and support them as like, you know, from the most understanding point of view you can, that it's really difficult, and being a teenager is really difficult. And I think that promoting healthy education and being very sort of concise with things is important, especially for beginners or their parents. It's potentially up to a lot of money that they might be spending, and I think that it's important to sort of gradually ease kids and their guardians into that, because it can be a struggle, as with any fandom.
What do you view MNFurs' role in providing start over. What do you view MNFurs' role in providing an environment for teen programs and community?
I guess I just answered that. Whoops. I think having more opportunities. I think a lot of the instances that we have where we have get-togethers, it's really good, and it's really good for people who are already there. I know, as someone who did not attend a lot of social functions very recently and then suddenly did, it's really daunting. And I don't know if that means that we should have more like teen meet and greets. I don't know if we should have that like as a thing like at pre-existing events like FM or during picnic or something, that we sort of have a set time or space, and that might increase that ability to sort of meet with other people in your like age group. And obviously like there isn't really an age boundary, but at the same time meeting people who are sort of at the same point in their life I think makes things a lot easier. I think always there's instances in larger social situations, or you go on vacations and they're always like teen fun night, and I know that seems probably really dumb, but like finding a way to sort of keep that safe space for them, I think is really important. And then having that sort of option. I know that like a lot of things in terms of like finding like ways to commission people or like fursuits and stuff, it's very like, if you're not on the internet, you're kind of in trouble. And I think that that's too bad, and I think that not everyone has that access, and we need to keep that into account as well, and try to keep that open to everybody.
As we are entering an era of inclusion where old norms in society are not acceptable, how are you going to make MNFurs more inclusive? How will you get more people involved from all walks of life? Women, gay, lesbian, transgender youth.
I think that it's most important to just sort of not get really hung up on that. I mean, maybe that's not bad. Like, I think that it's important to be as inclusive as possible, and I think that by making a sort of a conscious choice to be inclusive is one thing, but maybe any amount of pressure is not. I don't think that it's something that I actively think of when entering into a fandom. It's something that sort of comes out, and there have been a lot of instances sort of within the furry community that have actively sort of gone against that, which is disappointing to see. And I think that happens no matter what fandom that you're in, or any group that you're in. You're always going to find some instance of like people being like, oh, but I hate blank. And it's just like, whoa, no. I've seen a lot of people starting to really sort of blanket statement and be like, you can't just have a problem with women, or you can't just have a problem with gay people. And I think that promoting a healthy community and sort of being aware of where those problems may lie, and then finding out sort of how to adjust for them, and talking to people and really showing like, these people are part of this one thing just like you, and sort of promoting that active acceptance and having a sort of level of response to intolerant behavior, in terms of just, if it's in a public setting, it's one thing, but if it's, on forums and stuff, being there to remind people that it's not a part of our community as a whole, I think is important.
How are you going to get more volunteers to help out MNFurs?
The age-old volunteering problem. Perpetual. Numerous. I think finding ways of giving examples, like concrete examples of how volunteering helps the community. I think that a lot of times it is about hanging out with your friends and being with people who you enjoy spending time with, or seeing people you don't see very often. And I think that that's equally important, but one of the reasons that I have done staffing and volunteering, and then also taken an active role in a completely other convention setting, is because I personally want to find ways of giving back. Being parts of social communities and fandoms has really helped me long term. And I think that it actually does for a lot of other people, and it's just sort of discussing openly and in a very specific manner in terms of like how that can really help give back to the community. I think saying it sort of in a blanket statement isn't always enough for people, and kind of being like, hey, when this helped you, it can then help other people, and things don't continue if there aren't enough people helping press them along. And I think that having ways of sharing that with people is good. And a lot of people come around eventually. I think that it's, when you're a couple years in, it's really exciting. And then you're like, I need something to do.
Nonprofit groups require funds to remain operational. How do you propose that MNFurs create new revenue streams?
I guess at this point, I'm not 100% sure on what we do to create revenue streams to begin with, so I guess I wouldn't know if they were new or not. At the same time, I think it's still a lot about that community support. I think that it's, if you are a certain level of sponsor at like FM, you get more things. But at what point is that sort of paying for itself at the same time, or at what point is it paying out for the community long term? And I think that that's kind of where we have to break things down in terms of like what is enough. And you can use like things like Kickstarter as an example. Like, at one point, are you overreaching? I would like to try and do more community-based stuff. I think that that's important. I think that we already do a lot. I think that there's always room for more, and I understand that, like, obviously time is an issue. I'd like to try and maybe work with other parts of the various fandom communities or various other conventions. I think that that is a good jumping off point. I'd like to become a better resource overall, I think, for the furry community, but also sort of as an educational tool. I know that that's important to MNFurs as a whole, and I guess I'd like to promote that. And try to find ways to utilize that education and maybe like ways of helping younger people especially sort of get into it and kind of leave that door more open in terms of giving back to us to keep going forward.
Do you believe there is something holding our organization back, and if so, what?
I guess I don't really know sort of how necessarily the behind the scenes in MNFurs functions. I think that utilizing sort of and following trends is important in any social community. Currently, the way that the forum functions, I periodically post on it, but I forget about it a lot. It's not on my normal sort of roster, and I think that that's tough. I know that, there's Telegram, there's Slack, there's Twitter, there's FA, sort of. I'll just put that over here. And I think that it's tough for people, and I think that it's tough to sort of keep that on your, like, in your 40 billion tabs that you have open on your internet browser. And I think that trend following, just because of the nature of it, you just sort of have to keep up on it. And there has to be a group of people or a person or something that sort of is aware of that and keeps up. And even if that means that we end up having, 20 channels of different things, I think that that's sort of necessary. And I feel sometimes that we could just have more. And it's not necessarily that it's a lack. It's just that there could be more options and more opportunities for people who have different mediums to sort of be like, oh, that's that thing. And then they don't always have to sit like on a forum site with a tab open and be like, there's a chat function. Who are these people? And then maybe you never talk to them. I never talked to them. I've met one person through the forum, and that was about it.
Do you have a plan of action to help non-supportive parents become more supportive of their child's interest in furry?
It's not a sex thing. Okay, that's my big thing. Like, that's a whole different thing. Just like it's a whole different thing in anything. I say anything. I keep doing that a lot because all fandoms are fandoms, and they all have different ways of expressing that. I think that there's just this really, really prevalent long-term hang-up. I'm not going to say where it stemmed from. Everybody knows where it stemmed from. And it's something that's like, oh, this is like 15 years old. You got to get over it. And I think promoting sort of that really open, like there's no secrets. There's no like hush-hush, like being really open and being really honest and being like, hey, this is part of this. And then there's all of these other different parts. People are just in it for the art. People are in it because they like looking at what other people create. They like creating themselves. And I think that that's an important thing to kind of make sure guardians, but also just people who are maybe older and entering in like with like a younger sibling or a cousin or, something like that. I think that that's really important to just be like, hey, all fandoms have parts of themselves that are not what you want your child or younger, kid being part of, but they're gonna meet it somewhere anyways. And I think that on the whole, this is a very open and welcoming community, and I think that that's one where, for the most part, it's safe. And I think that that's really something to promote, is the willingness to be like, oh, you're 14 and you want to draw some cute furry badges, like, go for it. Like, there's literally no harm in it. And I think that getting over those weird sort of long-lasting hurdles and not seeing it as something that's weird or not okay just need to be completely jumped over. And I think that it's tough, and I think that being very gentle with parents is important, or guardians, and I think that that's sometimes people get scared and then they get angry, and I understand that, and I think that not immediately condemning them for being worried is also really important. Communication is good.
Definitely. If elected to the board of Minnesota Furs, how do you see yourself handling being a public figure?
I'm really good at calling people. It's something that I've worked on a lot. I'm really fine with talking to sort of the non-fandom crowd, actually better than I probably am talking to the fandom crowd. Sorry, everyone. Yikes. I think that it's something where I'm very happy to answer questions. I'm very willing to be forthcoming with information. And like I mentioned earlier, if someone doesn't understand something or if they have a question or a problem, I'm very willing to answer that to the best of my ability. And hope that if they still don't understand it, they would be like, I don't get that. And then we can try and figure it out. I'm very available, I guess. I'm happy to talk to people through email or through the forum that I don't go on a ton. From the first point that I was sort of saying that I wanted to run to be on the board, it was always like, talk to me. I'm fine with talking about my positions on anything, really. And I'm always sort of wanting to help folks kind of do the best and be the best that they can. I always want people to be happy and healthy. And if I can help do that with a specific group of people, I think that that's great.
How would you handle a complicated task given to you by a community member? To provide an example, they want to set up an event with another nonprofit organization.
Super. That's my jam. I think timing's really important. There's so many events that happen all through the year. Don't even get started on the summer because that's a mess. From, I guess, using that example, communicating with whatever member of the community actively wants to do the event, setting up times for either them or myself and another member of the board and them, some grouping, to connect with the other individual and group in question. If it's something that is farther away, taking into account timing and transportation, setting up carpools, stuff like that, I think is really important. A lot of people drive, a lot of people have fursuits. Carpooling is super duper. And I think sort of approaching it from outward and then working inward is more important. I don't care about what cookies people are bringing, but I do care about where it's going to take place. Event space, timing, time of year, ease of access are all kind of primary things that we would hit first before sort of detailing. I think a lot of times details are the more fun part, but they aren't really what gets things actually happening. Follow-ups, halfway point follow-ups, right before the event follow-ups, I think are also really important. Same thing, communication is the best way of getting things done.
As a board member, the authorities approach you demanding information on a certain community member. How would you proceed?
Wait, who comes to me asking? People?
As a board member, the authorities approach you demanding information on a certain community member. How would you proceed?
The authorities? What is the authorities? Like legal authorities?
Legal
or like
authorities like police,
Oh.
government entities.
Is that something that happens? That's a tough one because it really depends on the situation. And I think that it's not really necessarily appropriate to answer in one way or the other, just given the circumstances. If it was something like, like this person, the individual is involved in some sort of, I don't know, fraudulent activity. I don't know. What are people involved in these days? I think that it really comes down to like talking with the individual at hand, but then also remaining sort of non-biased towards either thing, especially because it is a fairly close community. There's a really high chance of everyone knowing each other or knowing something about the thing that is or isn't happening. And I think keeping that sort of collateral to the absolute minimum, especially if there is some legal issue involved, I think that that's the most important thing overall, is to minimize damage that ripples out to the rest of the community. There's a lot of time for like, everyone's on the internet, everyone's like, oh, let's all talk about this, let's not talk about this. Like, that's not helpful, and especially in a case where it is a legal thing that can really trip people up. And if it was something where it was something that's actually going on, it then subsequently makes it worse if there's a bunch of people talking about it. Unfortunately, I don't really feel like anything past that point I have an actual good answer for, just because it's really case by case.
What is the thing or activity that MNFurs has done that made you proud or put a smile on your face?
I really like Zubu. I've never done it, but I'm really excited by it. It would be something where I think that if I had a fursuit, I totally would, because it seems really exciting. I think kids really like furries. That's kind of it. Like, everybody, like, no kid, I mean, there's kids who are afraid of mascot costumes, that's fine, that happens, but, like, I think that it's just really cool, and you get to see, like, this massive amount of, like, you know, you get your hyper-realistic suits, and you get people who are just, you know, hanging out with people, and then you get, like, super toony suits, and I think that that's really cool, and I think it's really cute, and I think that it really sort of allows for that community connection with a large amount of people who are just, they're normal, but they got kids, and kids are like, I don't think there's anything rare. This is the greatest thing I've ever seen, and I think that that's great. I'm always really excited when it comes up, but I'm just like, oh, that's so cool, that's that thing, and then I just don't do anything about it, but I guess that's what I really like.
With the Sofuri and Kavat database hacks revealing many furs' real names, what actions or suggestions do you give or take to help protect our members' privacy?
I didn't even know about that. Surprise. Okay, so with zero understanding of what was going on, other than apparently there's a security breach that happens. I think that it's important to keep things not necessarily as closed off as possible, because I think that that's also a safety thing. I think that it's important, especially for large communities or larger events, when it comes to things like furry migration. I feel like there is a lot of safety sort of that has to be taken into account. And so I think that there always needs to be somewhere that a legal name is able to be found. Just because if something happens, if someone gets sick, if somebody passes out due to heat exhaustion, not that that ever happens, etc., I think that it is really important for someone in an authority position to be able to have emergency contact. That said, when it comes to social events, get-togethers, minimizing where that is sort of findable, I think is a primary thing. I think that a lot of folks sort of have this as an outlet, and I think that it's important to respect that privacy in the same way that on the other side it's important to respect the need for safety or a potential like issue arising with an individual where it might become like a health issue or a legal issue.
Being a 501c3, we are an educational group not affiliated with politics. With today's environment, how do you keep politics out of this group and organization?
I think that, like, personal politics are something where you can... There's ways of sort of avoiding being confrontational, and I think that that's really important, and sort of being aware of the fact that most people have some stance politically on various things, and maybe some issues are more important and some are less. I think that no matter what, even though that is the case, by actively saying earlier that we have to like, how are we going to work on being more inclusive? We actively are taking a political stance. No matter what, that's sort of the case. That said, you know, don't go fishing for trolls. There's ways of sort of being political but not political. And I think that that's kind of the line you have to walk. If things sort of get out of hand, or if there's like hate groups forming, that's when you sort of have to keep that awareness, and that line gets really, really fine in terms of what is acceptable due to the fact that it is a nonprofit, but then also where that line gets drawn in terms of what's okay just for being a person or being an individual as part of a community, where that kind of hang up ends. Do I think that every single thing has to have some sort of angle involved? No, and I think that that is something to try and pacify as a board. And I think that not letting that necessarily actively influence every single decision is always important. But at the same time, some things obviously are sort of unavoidable, but it's how they are maintained and brought up that change it from being political to just being part of who the community sees us as. So,
if you could change anything about the meets, what would it be?
Meets? I only go to picnics. I think finding a way to better sort of talk about what everyone's doing. I see a lot of people, some forum thing, sort of floundering with like, how to meet up. Are people carpooling? How are people getting together? What are we doing? And I think that finding some way to better Google Docs, that doesn't, sometimes that works. I got sent a Google Docs thing, like 3 people had something on it. I was like, oh, and I don't even know what I'm bringing. I didn't think about that at all. Like potlucks, I panic at potlucks. And I don't know if that means sort of finding different ways of utilizing more types of social media and then sort of kind of putting them together as one sort of unit to sort of be like, oh, here's what the things are. I think that a lot of times because meetups and events are either very out in terms of planning or like, oh, by the way, people are meeting up. I think that becomes tough. And most people sort of tend to be like, oh, my buddy is going, I will go with them. But that's sort of where that communication ends. Like rideshare and things would be great to find a way of better working with, where it's not just sort of devolving into just a mess on Telegram or something, because I feel like that's usually what happens. Is like, oh yeah, let's have this group that's specifically dedicated. Nope. And I get it. Like, social creatures, but also finding a way to better maintain that would be great.
What is something we do well as a group?
I can't just say turn around and say organize events. I don't know if that's right. I think that in general, like as a specific thing, I really like picnics. Picnics are what actually got me to socialize, like with the furry community, which is kind of weird because it was really cold. It was really unpleasant, but that was fine. I made a head in a week. It was really awful. We were just going to avoid talking about that now. That's, I guess, my specific thing in terms of like what we do, like what we do well. And I think in general, I think that it's the attitude, honestly. I think that even though there are times and instances where maybe things don't actually follow through the best, or in certain instances or with certain people, I think that overall the behavior and the support of the community is really good. And I think that we could do a lot worse in that. And I mean, obviously there's always technicality, but overall I think that the way that the majority of the people in MNFurs approach others is really nice.
As this group gets older, how do we provide programs and opportunities for adults and more mature activities?
I think it's about finding out what people like that isn't just furry stuff. I think that there's a lot of opportunities to sort of build these long-lasting friendships with people who don't have much in common with you. And I like that. I like that you can meet with an individual who maybe is just into this one thing, and then as you get to know them, you find out that you both really love food, you really love gaming, you really love books, you both are really into one author, like, and I think that that's really great. I think that that's that jumping off point that we need to support with, you know, young people who are coming into it. I think that we need to continue to nurture it with people who are older. I think that finding ways of doing things that aren't running around and getting super drunk and going to clubs. Everybody, sure, great, okay, at some point you gotta not do that because it's exhausting and your back hurts and it's terrible, and sometimes people are just homebodies, and I think that finding ways to support that and be like, hey, that's okay, is great. I'd like that. I'm a homebody. I think that meetups in public spaces, but at a lower key energy level, would be swell. I think that there's ways of doing that in a way that would be enjoyed, appreciated, acceptable.
Fur Migration is a chartered event under MNFurs to run as a mostly independent event. With board members, staffing, and senior staff positions, how do you see the validity of this independence granted by the charter?
I think that the way to continue to have migration be independent, though still like a parent-child, is like a pseudo, I don't want to call it an internship. That sounds really official and really unpaid, which it is anyways, but I guess that's not the point. I think that if we have become hyper-reliant on individuals who have lives, you know, things happen, things come up, they might not always be able to be at that event or at the setup for that event, and that's bad if suddenly you lose that person, or that person's been up for 15 hours fixing the registration setup. Not naming names. I think that some sort of internship, like having people who are interested in doing that, learning from that person, will help take sort of some amount of stress away from the individuals who have been filling multiple shoes, or who have been like really running their energy level down, or who have been there for 15 hours. Having other people who understand similar things, or sort of seeking out others who seem to be really good or catch on to those types of things, I think would be really beneficial in continuing, because then they can move forward and those other people can either step into other roles, or they can step back and maybe enjoy themselves and not be, you know, really in the weeds all the time at an event that should be enjoyable as well.
What can we do to train leadership in community, con, and ourselves?
I think leadership's hard. I think that no matter what, it's tough. I think that sort of promoting that to other people is even harder, because the majority of people, if being like, hey, you want this, do you want to be in a teaching position? Do you want to be in a position where you are responsible for others, whether it be the general public or other members of the community? I think that that's a hard thing to do. I think that approaching someone, it's like approaching someone and being like, you want to be a manager? And everyone's like, I don't know what you're talking about. What? No. Yes, no. I think that that's the panic response sort of all the time with the majority of people. I mean, obviously there's people who want to, but I think that gently is the way to do it. I think that sort of being like, hey, how can we as a community help people? Or how can we support people? Or how can we introduce people to different parts of this community, or to new parts of the community if they're new? And that becomes when given that responsibility of helping others, I think that that's where leadership comes in more than being like leadership position, little box that everything sort of fits into. And it's a way to make people who aren't, who you're asking that of them, to really balk and be like, what? I don't want that. That doesn't sound like me. That doesn't sound good. And it's causes a lot of anxiety. And I think that the best way is to approach it like you'd approach, a member of your family, or train your dog or something like that. Animals will help other animals when encountered. If you have an older dog and you have a younger dog, that older dog will keep that younger dog in line. And I think that that's important, and sort of to always keep in mind is sort of lead by example, and don't force them gently.
How do you plan on focusing on Minnesota Furs and putting the organization and community first?
That internet stuff, that's my big thing. It's like internet and education. Those are my two things. It's for. I think that a lot of it's about consistency. It's not necessarily about like making the biggest push over, a week. It's more about consistently being available and around and communicating back and forth with the other board members, with the community, with people who aren't in the community or who are very on the outskirts, etc. I think that that's kind of how to best approach things, I guess. One push, one part of 1 month doesn't necessarily long-term help. I think that long-term outreach helps grow numbers over a longer period of time rather than immediately and quickly. And I think that that's kind of what fandoms in general sort of need to approach. There's always going to be the Naruto, right? Like there's that one thing that's like, yeah, and then suddenly like there's thousands of them all the time. But long term, how can we keep people? And how can we have them bring others in rather than just them, and they are so into it that maybe they scare their friends off a little bit? I think that that's kind of the approach that's more sustainable long term.
What does the fox really say?
All I think about is the little one that goes in the snowbank, right? Where it's like whoop, but I don't know what it says. How exciting.